Uh, what is that? Uh, what is that?
My husband, he recently. My husband, he recently.
I am so mad at him! I am so mad at him!
My name is Wren Stark Haven. I am a production sound mixer, and this is my very unscientific narrative production shakedown of the Konos MEMS array microphone. So I work mostly as a production sound mixer on narrative films. I've worked as a utility and as a boom op on union shows. I also do a lot of re-recording mixing and sound design for smaller narrative projects. And I teach a little bit of film sound at a film school here in New York that will go unnamed. All of that's to say, I have a pretty broad view of the narrative film sound process, and I'm really, really curious about this craft. I have a theory that narrative production sound is more of a film craft than it is a sound craft. And what I mean by that is, I feel like our job is to take robust knowledge of how to record sounds and to make those technologies and that work fit into the process of filmmaking, which is just this like other really specific thing that has all of these other specific needs, right? And so the greater kind of like sound recording industry could make a product that's like amazing and super high fidelity, but like if it doesn't fit on the end of a pole and like swing around in the air good, it's not really going to work for us, right? And this Konos microphone was the first time I heard about like a novel technology in production sound, and I was really just sincerely confused. Like, oh, would that work? Would that be good for us? Will this work for narrative production? Will it add value to the dialogue recording side of narrative production? And my idea to test it was to just take it out on a real world film that I thought had a good representation of the common problems we face in recording dialogue and narrative production. And so I got in touch with Peter Schneider, who, if you don't know him, he's like the most useful and helpful man in production sound probably ever. And Peter's a friend and colleague and like super generously was like, yeah, just you can totally do that. Just like make a video. And this is that video. And it's very late. And I'm sorry, Peter. I'm sorry to Peter and the good people of Gotham Sound for how late this video is. Just a little bit of background before we get into the specifics of what we learned using this microphone on a film. Operated microphone technology hasn't really changed much since the 60s. I would say like 99.9% of production sound mixers are still using some sort of powered condenser microphone as their operated microphone, usually at the end of a boom pole. And when we record dialogue, we do it with both the operated microphone and a lavalier microphone on the talent. Most contemporary dialogue mixes consist of a boom and a wire, a boom track and a wire track for every character that speaks. A common misconception that I've learned a lot about since entering the world of post-production sound is in most contemporary dialogue mixes, we're hearing both the signal from the boom and the wires all the time. A lot of production sound people don't understand this, and a lot of producers misunderstand it. But the reason to wire all the time nowadays, if you can, it isn't so that you can just not boom. Like wires aren't a replacement for the boom, which is what most production sound mixers are like screaming daily at the top of their lungs to the void. But the reason to wire all the time is because what we do in a dialogue edit nowadays is we'll take the boom track and we'll take the wires and we'll phase align them, and we'll have them both on faders ready to play with all the time. But usually blending the two of them creates like the richest and clearest sound. And just for an example, I'm recording myself right now on a COS 11 and a 416. And I'll just play like, here's the 416, I'm talking on the 416, and here's the COS 11 on its own, and I'm talking on the COS 11 on its own, and here's the blend. And I changed the timbre of my voice a little bit there, so it's kind of not a very scientific. The question of the operated microphone is an interesting one, because a lot of production sound mixers have their own strong opinions about like what pickup pattern to use or what brand to use. Like people are like, oh, Seamit, it's the best. And other people are like, you don't need anything other than a 416 or maybe like a bunch of 416s. All of those are valid strategies, I think. But what Konos is offering, some background on them, what they're offering is something that is truly novel. So instead of one condenser microphone that's powered and creating one mono signal, they have created a MEMS array, which is an array of some greater than one amount of microphones. In this case, there are 80 microphones in a form factor that is roughly like the shape and size of a shotgun condenser microphone. And that MEMS array sends a bunch of raw signal to a decoder box, and that decoder box produces 3 signals. It produces the pickup pattern that you choose, it produces everything else, and it produces, air quotes, smart noise reduction, which is basically A minus B, as I understand it. And yeah, those 3 signals come out at line level, natively XLR from that box. So we took the Konos onto a narrative short film to see if that concept lives up to real world application. And let me just show you a bit of what we experienced. And just to refresh, the question we're asking here, I think is best summarized as, does this technology make our work easier or better, right? Is there added efficiency in using this technology on set? And is there an increase of fidelity? We're going to start with all of the negatives. The Konos in its current form requires a lot more support than your traditional condenser microphone. My 416 here, I can plug it into a preamp, fire it up, it's pretty much good to go. The Konos is its own ecosystem, and you need the whole ecosystem for it to function. So the encoder box takes 12 volts DC. That was not an extra 12 volt DC line via USB-C was not something I readily had like available on my power distribution. Gotham gave us the power supply they used with it, which was useful, but it was just like another thing to carry around. That box is also bigger and heavier than I expected it to be. That might sound like a small complaint, but like when you're trying to keep your cart neat and organized, or if you're working out of a bag, which we had to in a couple of scenes, it takes up quite a bit of space. I think there are ways of mitigating some of like the cable management stuff that I had problems with, just with time and with like people building their own rigs. Like cable management is a solvable problem, but it's a thing to consider. The biggest problem that I had with the microphone in terms of like ease of use is running Ethernet cable. The best and easiest solution I could come up with was just to buy a 50-foot Cat5 cable and try to make it workable the same way I would if I were just hardwiring a boom. And that's what we did, and it worked pretty good. We never had issues just with a couple of bongo ties. We never had issues with like kickouts or like any like weird, tomfoolery with like the connector getting loose or anything. Like I expected that system to be very fragile, and it actually seems quite robust. So that's a positive actually. But if you're running you and your boom op are running a cable for every shot, it adds stress and time to the setup of every shot. And most boom ops I know, I'm certainly accustomed to working wirelessly. Most boom ops I know are accustomed to working wirelessly at this point. And I would go so far as to say most productions are used to wireless boom. They're not used to having to wait for or incorporate a cable run into the process of setting a shot up. And I think it's a significant ask. On this film, the filmmakers were super prepared, super gracious, and they never minded if they had to wait a couple of extra seconds for a cable to, get run a different way or routed a different way. But I've been on plenty of tier shows, as I'm sure most of us have, where we're burning 2 or 3 cameras. Sometimes the third camera gets added last minute, and you're the boom op and you need to make a game day decision in the next 5 or 10 seconds about where you're going to stand. And you can't do that if you're hardwiring. And it's a real consideration. If they figure out a way to get this thing wireless, then that complaint is over. Now let's get into the good. Nice, really nice. Sounded great. I was floored by the off-axis rejection of this microphone, and I will just play like a few examples.
What is that? What is that?
I need you to change my electricity to my name. My husband, he recently. I need you to change my electricity to my name. My husband, he recently.
We came up against some really surprising challenges on this film. We had like full-on like thunderstorms, and the amazing grip department was able to like cheat like dark, gloomy, rainy days for sunny days to match our lighting. And that all of a sudden became a huge sound department challenge.
Are you gonna record how it cut out all this rain?
Yeah. The filmmakers want to play it all as a sunny day. And we were hearing, you know, like torrential rain. And the Konos, for my money, rejected the rain better than the wires did. It rejected better than anything I've heard. It really blew my mind. This is kind of the perfect test of the microphone. Last shot probably of the movie. We gotta get it. And we're hoping this microphone lets us do it. Whoa, okay. That might be a little dangerous.
I am so mad at him. I am so mad at him.
Another more minor difference between the Konos and like your traditional condenser that worked really well for us was the ability to dynamically change pickup patterns during a shot. Throughout rehearsal, it became clear that the two lead actors were going to be improvising and kind of talking over each other. And we were outside, and I was, you know, as the production mixer, wanting to get the best signal to noise kind of dialogue recording I could. And that recommended that we be in the narrowest pickup pattern for most of the scene. But getting those cues was impossible for the boom op because they were doing it different every take. So what we were able to do was start the scene in the wider pickup pattern, and that made the boom op's job a lot more forgiving, so she could get all of the improvised lines. And then when the actors settled into the more like line A, B, kind of like the more on the script dialogue, I switched back to the narrow pickup pattern in the middle of the scene. And that's something you can't really do with a condenser microphone.
Oh, get away from me! What are you doing?
You're bleeding.
You're bleeding.
I'm bleeding.
No, you're
Where?
getting it on.
No. Your head.
Do not touch me. I know.
So we've talked about the good and the bad. I think the most interesting part, though, is just the different. A little piece of background that I think will help articulate this point is if you speak to veteran dialogue editors, they will tell you how much they value, pardon my French, shitty tone. It seems counterintuitive, especially to us production mixers who think we just want as little noise as possible, which we do. But when it comes to dialogue editing, we tend to value hiding the cut much more than we value signal to noise, right? So to tone out a scene, what we'll do is we'll actually add noise back into the scene, like into the gaps between dialogue, so that you never hear a cut on the boom track. And the thing about the off-axis rejection of this microphone is when I was dialogue editing with it, I had a really hard time creating natural sounding tone. And that's a real consideration. Again, I wouldn't call this good or bad. I think it's just something really worth investigating about this microphone is how do you tone out a scene? There very well could be a workflow with this mic where you go really hard on noise reduction and then you work backwards to try to find tone that you can lay down evenly, and maybe it would result in like a super efficient dialogue editing process. Or you use the B side, like the output 2, and you create tone out of that because that was actually in the room. But I can't help but feel like, I don't know, it's a taste thing. I kind of like the shitty tone that my 416 makes more than the shitty tone that I could kind of synthesize from the Konos recordings. I think reasonable minds could disagree about this. And with the rise of really, really good AI noise reduction, we might be at a point where the dialogue editing process and the dialogue mixing process is going to change. I think my prognosis after using it is it's really good. It's really good, and I would like to have one in my cart. I don't know that I would use it for every scene, but I think, especially in high noise environments, that off-axis reduction is an incredibly powerful tool, and one that I would love to offer directors, as I was able to offer our director on this short film when it started raining. So much of the time as a production sound mixer, you are the bearer of bad news. And I think this microphone has the potential to give us a tool to fight back a little bit. And that's really exciting. But I have some suggestions for how it might be better. The first and most obvious one is making it wireless. I don't know if that's possible at all. I'm not an engineer, but I do know that culturally and like in terms of like the practical workflow of low to mid budget indie filmmaking, we've come to rely heavily on wireless booming, and it would make this microphone fit that production style a lot better. I also wonder if the pickup pattern could be a fader instead of like a switch. So I talked about like that dynamic switching, and if that pickup pattern could be a fader, I wonder if that might help my room tone problem too, right? Because like it would be really cool to like dial in like I want to hear like this much of the world or like this much of the world. Right now you have three options on the Konos. You have a narrow, a medium, and a 50-50 wide. And that's a pretty good range, but I don't see why it couldn't be a fader. I don't see why I couldn't have like total control. And I don't see why I couldn't also ride that dynamically. If I could, I bet as a mixer with my own boom op, I could actually add a lot of value to the dialogue editing process if I had a good enough ear for listening to tone and for paying attention to what was on camera and what wasn't on camera. I would also just love, I mean, this is like a small thing and I'm sure they're working on it, but we kind of had to jerry rig some accessories for it in terms of like wind protection and chalk mounting. And the form factor of this microphone is just a little bit different than condensers. It's a square, not a circle, and that just makes integrating it into the larger ecosystem hard because it needs its own stuff. The Konos is a really strong first take at a technology that I believe can be transformative to the operated microphone, but isn't just yet. It's still, in this iteration, a really strong tool that I will at some point add to my workflow, and I think many folks will when they listen to it. But yeah, it's kind of generation zero tech. And obviously that comes with some warts and some awkwardness. Just want to say a really quick thank you to Nino, my boom op, Piet, Sarah, Lizzie, Hannah, the filmmakers behind I Turn Grills On, for letting us test this microphone on their set and letting us use some of the footage. And of course to Peter from Gotham Sound for lending us the unit and being supportive of this process, and for forgiving us for being so late on this video. Thank you, Peter. I hope people disagree with me and tell me how wrong I am about some of this in the comments. I'm sure you will. And until next time, I hope this was helpful. Goodbye. Nino, what is this?
It's
What is this?
it's a sound thing.
What is this?
That you don't know about.
What is
I
this?
don't know. I feel like I just cheated.